The beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, are forever etched in the annals of history as the site of one of the largest amphibious invasions ever attempted. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, the soldiers of the United States 116th Infantry Regiment waded ashore from landing crafts, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. The rising tide soaked their boots, but it was not the tide they feared. It was the hail of bullets that greeted them from entrenched German machine gun positions on the bluffs above. These positions, fortified and deadly, had been prepared with such care that they seemed to defy all logic. As the soldiers fought their way across the 3-kilometer stretch of Omaha Beach, they came face to face with a weapon that would dominate the day's events: the German MG42. The MG42, with its terrifying cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute, unleashed a wall of lead that chewed through everything in its path. It became a death sentence to anyone unlucky enough to cross its line of sight. In fact, one MG team alone was responsible for 114 casualties in under 15 minutes, a staggering figure that spoke to the devastating power of this weapon. Its rapid fire made it nearly impossible for soldiers to advance, forcing them to hunker down in the sand, pinned by the ferocity of the barrage. The tactical question was simple: how do you move 300 meters under constant fire from a weapon that fills every second with bullets? How do you cross a killing field without becoming another casualty? This moment on Omaha Beach was just one small part of a broader story, a story of two weapons, two doctrines, and two nations, at war, each struggling to find its place in a conflict that would stretch from the shores of Normandy all the way to the heart of Germany. The MG42 was part of a German approach that relied on speed, intensity, and the ability to overwhelm an enemy with shock tactics. It was a weapon designed to dominate the minute, to fire as fast as possible, and create fear and chaos. However, the United States had a different approach. The American M2 Browning, though slower and heavier, was built for endurance. It wasn't about overwhelming fire in the first few seconds. It was about sustained, reliable fire that could last for hours, day after day. The contrast between these two weapons goes beyond technical specifications. It speaks to deeper differences in doctrine and logistics, in how each side saw warfare and how they approached the challenge of fighting a war on a global scale. On the other side of the ocean, the United States had already developed its own heavy machine gun, the M2 Browning. It was a more traditional design, slower in its rate of fire, but built to last. The M2 was rugged, reliable, and could sustain long periods of continuous fire without the same level of wear and tear as the MG42. Its 12.7mm caliber made it highly effective against light vehicles, aircraft, and infantry, with an effective range that far outstripped that of the MG42. But the M2's strength was not in its ability to overwhelm an enemy in a matter of seconds. Instead, it was in its ability to provide constant fire support over long periods, making it indispensable for convoy defense, airfield protection, and suppression of enemy positions. In the harsh realities of combat, where soldiers could be engaged in days-long firefights with little respite, the differences in doctrine and logistics between the German and American armies became increasingly apparent. The MG42 was a weapon designed to dominate the battlefield in a short burst, but it was dependent on a steady supply of ammunition and barrels to maintain its effectiveness. And as the war progressed, Germany's ability to maintain these supplies began to falter. Allied air raids, bombing campaigns, and the constant disruption of supply lines began to take their toll. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, German logistical systems were struggling to keep pace with the demands of combat. Resupply efforts were slow, and the MG42's devastating rate of fire was becoming less effective as German soldiers found themselves running out of belts and barrels. The United States, on the other hand, had built its entire war effort around the ability to sustain combat over the long haul. The M2 Browning, while slower and less spectacular in its rate of fire, was backed by an industrial base that could produce the weapon in vast quantities. The logistic systems in place ensured that there was a constant stream of ammunition and spare parts flowing to the front lines. While the MG42 could fire in short, violent bursts, the M2 could provide steady, unrelenting fire for hours. Its barrel life was measured in thousands of rounds, not hundreds, and with regular maintenance, it could continue to function without fail. This disparity in logistical capabilities became even more evident as the war progressed. In Tunisia, for example, the German MG42s had a distinct advantage in terms of firepower. but their reliance on a steady supply of ammunition became a major weakness. German units carried extra belts and spare barrels, but these were not always available when needed. And in the harsh desert conditions, where resupply was difficult and the enemy had air superiority, the Germans found themselves increasingly unable to maintain the intensity of fire that the MG42 demanded. The United States, meanwhile, had a different set of problems. While its logistics were far superior to those of the Germans, American forces still had to contend with the challenges of maintaining supply lines over vast distances. The M2 Browning, though slower in its rate of fire, was able to function effectively in a variety of roles, from defending convoys to providing suppressive fire during the assault on Normandy. It was mounted on half-tracks, trucks, and jeeps, giving American forces the flexibility to respond to threats from a variety of angles. The 50 caliber round, while not as fast as the German 7.92 mm, had a much longer effective range, making it ideal for dealing with targets at distance. But the M2's true strength lay in its integration into the larger logistical and tactical system that the United States had built. The Americans were able to deliver ammunition to their troops in vast quantities, ensuring that the firepower needed to suppress German positions and protect advancing troops was always available. Even as German positions on the bluffs began to fall, the M2 South continued to provide overwatch and suppressive fire, allowing American forces to advance and break the German lines. By the time of the Normandy breakout, in July 1944, the contrast between the MG42 and the M2 Browning had become a defining feature of the war. The MG42, brilliant as it was a weapon designed for short-term shock and surprise. It was deadly in the moment, but without the logistics to sustain its rapid rate of fire, it was a weapon that could not maintain its effectiveness over the long term. On the other hand, the M2 Browning, while slower and less spectacular, was part of a system that could sustain fire over days and weeks of continuous combat. It was a weapon built not just for battle, but for endurance. As the war moved into the final stages, it became clear that the side with the superior logistics would ultimately prevail. In the case of the United States, this meant not just having more weapons and ammunition, but having the ability to move them efficiently across vast distances, under constant threat from air raids and enemy attacks. The MG42, for all its brilliance, could not overcome the logistical problems that plagued the German war effort. Even as the Germans managed to produce hundreds of thousands of MG42s, they were unable to keep the supply lines open to support them. The M2 Browning's reliability, endurance, and versatility allowed the United States to maintain constant pressure on the German forces, whether through convoy defense, bomber protection, or suppression of enemy positions. It became the backbone of American firepower in key campaigns, from the beaches of Normandy to the fields of France and beyond. The MG42's advantage in the first few seconds of a firefight was clear, but it was the M2's sustained firepower that won the long game. By the time the war ended, the MG42 had proven itself to be a formidable weapon in the hands of the Germans. But it was ultimately the M2 Browning and the American logistical system that triumphed. The MG42 represented the best of German engineering in terms of rate of fire, but the M2 represented the best of American industry, reliability, and logistics. The ability to maintain fire over hours, days, and months no matter the conditions was what truly won the war. The MG42 may have ruled the battlefield for a few minutes, but the M2 ruled the entire campaign. In the end, it wasn't the speed of fire that mattered most. It was the ability to keep firing, no matter the cost.